Hello and welcome to another Victoria 3 video. This time we're going to be having a look at the developers' responses to the 27th dev diary, that being on technology. And just before we start, yeah, technology was a pretty damn good dev diary. No complaints about it, and seemingly no complaints from the community either. I haven't seen too much dissent, no pitchforks being raised. All seems pretty chill, so that's always a good thing. That's always a good thing. So let's have a look at some of the replies to the community comments. So first off, nice system. Is it possible to make big percentage of society literate just with religious schools? So religious schools are set up such that you cannot make it quite as comprehensive as private or public systems, which limits the extent of education access it can provide, but still provides parity at lower levels of bureaucracy expenditure. Seems reasonable. Yeah, I mean, there's not much to really say there. I mean, I don't know of any country that has full, religious schools only kind of thing. In this period, honestly, I'm not too knowledgeable, I guess, is probably the right word about how schooling worked in this time. So sure, why not? Sure. How significant is military technological advancements? Like if there is a war between France and the Vietnamese states in 1870, will it be literally like in history that 500 French could utterly rout 10,000 Vietnamese, or more like the EU4 style, where after a certain time all the distant Asian nations manage to catch up and fight Europeans on equal terms? So it's a balancing question, so it's quite a bit hard to answer definitively at this point in development, but I can elaborate on intent. If there is a significant discrepancy between two armies' military capabilities, this discrepancy can be made up by superiority in numbers in some cases, but it's highly situational, depending on the generals involved, terrain fought in, focus on offense versus defense, and so on. The biggest factor would be that would benefit the French in this situation is dynamic battle sizing and combat with mechanics, which makes it much less likely the French would be outnumbered and assaulted 20 versus 1 in any given battle, making it possible for a small detachment to stand their ground or even conquer territory. Another example of that would be when the British invaded China during the Opium Wars. It was a very, very small detachment of British soldiers, and they managed to do against quite a discrepancy in numbers, enough to open the Chinese markets and grab ourselves a little bit of Hong Kong. So, numbers aren't everything in this period, I guess. If the question is more about how rapidly countries tend to catch up to the forerunners in terms of technology, that also varies a lot. Most of the countries that start at a disadvantage get most of their tech development from spread, but also start with lower literacy and in some cases a severe lack of freedom of speech, which slows down the rate by which they develop. They're also unlikely to be able to afford well-staffed universities as a result of their low industrial developments and regressive taxation systems. But if a country can overcome these early limitations somehow, they can certainly catch up to the global technological leaders. Finally, bears mentioning that in Victoria 3, most technologies give you more options, not global buffs. And these options usually cost you something, so it's rarely the case that acquiring military tech just makes your army better. You have to implement and pay ongoing costs for upgrades too. If you want to compete with the great powers, you can't just rely on passive assimilation of their innovations. Alright, one thing I want to say is, what an absolutely amazingly comprehensive reply here. Like, the question is 2 lines. 2-line question, and most of it isn't even the question. Most of it is like an example of where this would apply, right? How significant is military advantage? Is it like in EU4 where the distant Asian nations will catch up? And then we've got an absolutely amazingly comprehensive reply here from, I'm not sure which dev it was, that just really goes in depth into the intent. Right, the intent behind what the system is. And while I'm still obviously not a fan of the system, I do think all of this is fantastic. I just want to point out just the level of response here is something I love to see. Yeah, it's really nice to see. So, moving on then. Enough fawning. So all technologies are researched simultaneously at snail's pace, but I couldn't push one individual tech. So he would not say at a snail's pace. Text spread is often a considerable factor. Even a technologically advanced country will probably acquire around 60% or so of their text, and at least part due to the spread from someone else who got there first. That's interesting. I wasn't expecting it to be about 60%. That's more than half, clearly. Yeah, that's a lot bigger than I had thought. That's interesting. But yeah, you can only target the research of one individual tech at a time. That could be one of the techs already spreading to you if you so choose, letting you acquire it earlier. I feel like technology pathing is going to be a big thing in multiplayer. Like, what is the optimal way to acquire technologies? And I think it's going to change, right? From game to game, from between multiplayer and single player, it's going to be different, because if there ends up becoming a meta on which technologies to rush, what path to take to them, to use in single player, because the AI won't follow that meta and they will spread the other techs to you. If that meta is a thing and you go into multiplayer and try and use it and everyone's using it, there won't be as many countries researching the things that you're not researching, so you won't get as much spread. That's kind of interesting. It's kind of a little bit of a thought experiment on how this system would impact multiplayer. That is, of course, only if there ends up being a meta. I obviously don't want there to be a hard and fast single meta, because that makes the game incredibly stale. But yeah, no, it's super interesting. Super interesting. I'm big fan of this. Oops. Oh, my apologies. Big fan. Yep. How are the wages of university staff calculated? Is it based on average income of the country, the average of the middle strata, or something else? So there is no normal wage recomputed for your country every week that's based on average wage rate across your private sector and incorporated states. This normal wage is used as the basis for government and military wages, though you can lower or raise it around that baseline if you wish. University workers get paid a government wage, so the same as pops who work in, for example, the government administrations and art academies. That's okay. That's something we hadn't learned before. Like, the normal wage is new to us, I think. Will certain nations start the game with negative research modifiers from the start of the game? So, not unless it's very obviously associated with some prior historical event, no. And I'm not aware of anything like that in the current build of the game. We try to avoid arbitrary country-specific modifiers unless they're obviously linked to something real, like geographic features, a law on the books, etc. Actually, here's an example. China should obviously be the world's major producer of silk, right? So instead of giving China like a flat plus 10% silk production just for being China, or saying that silk plantations can only be built in states that China owns at the game start, we made it so that the country actually starts with a tech nobody else can normally acquire: sericulture. This tech is disconnected from the rest of the tree and can only be acquired via a fence, as is an ancient tradition that was closely guarded, but if a part of China was to split off, that country would also have the knowledge of sericulture and would gain the benefit. I wonder if sericulture can be spread through the standard, tech spread that we've learned about already. But that's an interesting idea for sure. Sericulture. It's the first time I've ever heard of it. So, state press and censored press should allow the player to suppress certain ideas, but not be a static penalty to tech and idea spread. So if you don't want your pops to get any silly separatist, socialist, or fascist ideas, then you can suppress these. In the case of state press, it should even be possible to promote ideas that you want to spread. The advantage of free press would be that you don't need bureaucrats to oversee it, while with the censored or state press, the pops who have oppressed thoughts are more militant. So they've actually been toying with the idea of being able to tag specific text for suppression. The main challenge is making it something with comparable benefit to the other ways you can spend authority, rather than just a gimmicky thing you can do but won't do in practice. We'll certainly explore this for the future. I've got to say, I disagree with you that censorship should not be imposing a penalty to the general spread of ideas, though. I think it's reasonably well established that cracking down on freedom of speech tends to have a chilling effect on society. I would agree with that as well. Also, this guy's called Make Victoria 3. I do find that rather funny. I assume that account is like 10 years old at this point. It's kind of funny. I'm actually going to check. Because I'm curious. Make Victoria 3. Account February 19, 2018. So that was before Vicky 3 was announced. That's pretty funny. Alright. It seems there is a hard cap to innovation per week of 200 when literacy is at 100. This should not be the case. There's a lot of shoulds here and whatever. This should not be the case in assuming that it's national literacy. It would also mean conquering and incorporating large amount of land with illiterate people would harm your research progress. Not if you don't make them incorporated states. Which would not make much sense either. So at least should be changed to something like max innovation is base 100 plus average literacy times total pops times some modifier to reduce to reasonable levels. Luxembourg was certainly not backwards, but they were really famous for cutting-edge technology either. So the literacy-based hard cap to active innovation spend per week is absolutely intentional, since no matter how many universities you have, you can't research dynamite in a week. On the other hand, any overflow goes towards your tech spread to ensure that unis do something for you at all times. One important note is that only the literacy rate in incorporated states that matters for this purpose, so conquering huge swathes of land filled with illiterate pops won't penalize you as long as you don't incorporate them. Makes me think there's going to be some kind of strategy on how fast you are going to incorporate an area that you've conquered. Do you wait until it's literate before you incorporate it, or when is the ideal time to do so? Who knows? Great Dev Diary, I agree. One question, can you import more technologically advanced arms relative to what your country itself can manufacture from a foreign nation? And if so, would it be possible to get a discount to researching the tech needed to manufacture said arms? For example, if Germany buys tanks from the UK, but it cannot itself manufacture tanks because it doesn't have the tech, because it imports it from the UK, will it have a boost if it tries to research tank techs? So it's a bit of a complicated answer to this one. The general answer is that techs unlock new goods that must be known to the user as well as the producer. So a country cannot make use of imported tanks if they don't know how to make them. I don't like that. Don't like that one much. I'm sure there were plenty of historical examples of things that you don't know how to make being sold to you. I mean, if I'm the first country to research telephones, you should be quids in, right? You build yourself a telephone factory, you sell those telephones for absolute bank. But people can't buy them and use them if they can't themselves make them? That makes no sense. You don't need to know how it works to be able to use it. For example, my computer. I don't know how the fuck it works, but I use it. That's a terrible example. It's completely not related at all to this. But I the general thing still stands. I don't think you should need to know how to make them to be able to use them. On the other hand, different tiers of infantry just need more small arms, ammunition, etc., based on the idea that quantity equals quality for many goods. I also don't like that. So the ability to produce new firearms, increasing your output of small arms, is decoupled from the ability to use those firearms, which tends to be framed as an organizational or a doctrinal shift rather than one specifically based on armaments. At this point, we do not include any kind of tech boosts from running trade routes, maybe in the future. Yeah, no, I just don't like it. Nope. I do like the idea of getting a tech boost from trade. That seems like a very reasonable thing to do. But this is basically going back to warfare, which I've got plenty of problems with already. The idea that I've got new guns. I've researched new types of guns. Maybe instead of rifling and bolt action. I've researched bolt action, but instead of it actually improving the quality of your firepower, you've now got more small arms. No, not a fan. Not a fan at all of that idea. Like, the idea that quantity equals quality. No. Just no, I do not agree. I would like to point out Portugal also had sericulture. Specifically, in the northern part of the country, there is even a story about a Jesuit monk stealing mulberry tree branches and the like. While from my understanding, production of silk in Portugal was never much. But anyway, I do hope there is an event about the secrets of silk production being stolen by missionaries are in the game. So yeah, the way that we've modeled this is that certain states have the necessary preconditions for establishing silk plantations, but without the sericulture tech, they don't produce as well. So there's still a benefit to trading silk with China, though certain European countries are able to produce a certain amount of themselves for domestic use if they have the manufacturing demand for it. I kind of want to know what sericulture is now, to be honest. Does error-based tech spread mean that even underpowered countries get tech spread based on the year? For example, as Dahomey in 1900 can battleship tech spread even if you haven't researched any Era 5 techs yourself? So, no. The prerequisites for getting tech spread is you must theoretically qualify to research it yourself. It must be researched by someone else in the world already. So unless you've already got the prereqs to research battleships, you're not going to be getting tech spread in it. The actual year is absolutely never matters at all. The errors are guidelines for what to expect and not based on exact dates. That part I really like. Yeah, nothing wrong with this. A lot wrong with this. Yeah. If countries usually start with 20 to 30 technologies, and cutting-edge countries discover about one per year, and there are 175 techs, does this mean that even an advanced country will only get around 2/3 of the techs before the game end? And a country that starts off in a bad spot may not even get the majority of the techs? That seems odd. So it might be a little bit faster than that, but the intent is that only powerful major and great powers will be able to fully complete tech trees by the game end, will need to make hard decisions about which Era 5 techs to focus on when during the tail end of a campaign. A great many countries will acquire less, maybe not less than 50% due to the effects of tech spread in the latter half of the game, but perhaps around 60 to 70%. Okay, fair enough. Powerful majors and great powers will possibly and probably be able to get all of them. Seems reasonable, seems fine. What level of technology can a country that puts no effort into advancing literacy or building schools expect to reach? Will a Central African state with no import of ideas from outside its borders have steel working and the atmospheric engine in 1900? This is basically a question asking how passive the system is, trying to get a vague idea of the pace. It's impossible to have any opinion without a sense for it. Sure. So steel working and atmospheric engine by 1900, almost certainly yes. We're thinking of ways to model tech spread in a very isolated or isolationist countries with virtually zero contact with the outside world, but at the moment we make the assumption that all centralized countries have some sort of contact with the outside world and it's exposed to all kinds of ideas. Whether they would like to or can afford to implement them is another matter. Could be based on trade. Could be like, yeah, ideas spread really, really slow, but if you trade, then that speeds up significantly. Could totally be a thing. Do historical universities have their own name, like Harvard instead of University in Massachusetts? So, no. We will, however, look into player-named buildings and other entities post-release. We love the idea and want it in the game, but it comes with some unexpected complexity we don't want to risk at the moment. And also, just a bunch of people being assholes about it. I always turn off nation renaming in multiplayer games. It's not a good thing. How many technologies can spread at once? 3, 1 per tree. Less if there's nothing you qualify for in a certain tree. Alright. Looks really solid. I'm curious about one thing. Most of what we've seen so far is very different from what we've seen in previous Paradox games, but this looks quite traditional besides from the tech spread. This is not a bad thing per se, and I really like how it works together with literacy and the interest groups, but I would like to know what made you decide to go for a more traditional tech tree instead of something newer and more innovative like with warfare and economy. What makes this the perfect system for tech in Victoria 3? What? This is not like what we've seen in previous Paradox games. I do not agree with that at all. With Victoria 2, you had your various categories. You've got your various categories here as well, but that doesn't mean much. And then you went down them in sequence. In EU4, you've got 3 tech slots, and they're just sequential. Admin 1, Admin 2, Admin 3, Admin 4, Diplo 1, 2, 3, 4, Military 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's obviously not like that either. With Stellaris, I think that would maybe be the closest one. You've got your 3... Is it 3? Yeah, 3 categories. And while you can't see the tech tree, it is still a tree. But it's less like a tree and more like a garden of weeds, because there's lots of individual branches. You're like looking at a tree from the bottom. No, I don't know. It's weird, but it's not. It's maybe similar. It's the closest, but certainly not the same. I don't know where he's getting this from. Let's see if the Paradox devs know. Great question. We actually experimented with a lot of crazy ideas for quite some time, both on paper and in prototypes. All things we modded modeled, were cool in their own way, but often got in the way of the player expectations, were confusing, exploitable, or impossible to balance. Most of all, early feedback kept returning to the same thing: where is the tech tree? After digging further, we came to the conclusion that the key thing most people were after in their tech system for this game was the ability to plan ahead and strategize, and a lot of our clever ideas got in the way of that. As a supporting system for pacing and player strategizing, we came to the conclusion that technology in Victoria 3 needed to be intuitive and comprehensible first and foremost, not a minigame or something that drastically deviated from player expectations. God, I wish that argument was... just use that argument against the warfare system, right? After digging further, we came to the conclusion that the key thing most people were after in the warfare system for this game was the ability to have warfare. Right? Most of all, the feedback kept returning to the same thing. Where's the warfare? You know, it's yeah, you know, it's fine. It's fine. Will there be text requiring text from other tech trees? Not at the moment, for usability reasons. Representing prerequisites from off-tree could start getting really confusing. And in testing, we found that the error-based incentives to research things vaguely in order tends to smooth out most logical inconsistencies. Having said that, this is something on the roadmap to revisit in the future, as I think prerequisites, other than other texts, for example laws, could be a cool curveball to throw in some cases. So maybe we'll figure out a way to represent this later down the line. Alright. Can you change what technology to research once you've started with one? And if so, do you lose the innovation spent on the other one, or does it does it get stored as progress done for the previous technology? So yes, you can change your mind. No, you don't lose progress made. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Very good. Could you elaborate on the role of universities and their costs? Because shifty as shifty as long-time Grand Strategy game players are, I immediately had to think that spamming universities seems to be a no-regret way to get ahead in tech, even with the literacy limiter in place. Like this. I build universities way beyond the 200 innovation points maximum that is allowed by base and maximum literacy. I only research ahead of time. I use the remaining innovation to boost spending, catching all the techs I missed along the way. So I guess you thought of this, of course. Why is this not a good strategy, and how did you model the system that it isn't? So it's insanely expensive and has a lot of diminishing returns built into it. If you don't reinvest a sizable amount of your money into the economy, you'll eventually fall behind no matter how far ahead you are in tech. It's not really, just it's very expensive to do. It's still possible, though. Did I get it right that some society stuff can actually be detrimental to your country? So if your country has researched democracy, your interest groups can start demanding change to voting franchise laws. If you've not researched democracy, can they still demand it? The way that it works is that some society techs unlock laws along with ideologies that favour those laws. So at the same time as you're able to enact a law, you're also likely to get more people demanding that you do. In some cases, you're technically always able to enact a law, except that it has no support until the supporting ideology comes along to demand it. Alright. Are there technologies that increase population growth significantly? So effectively, yes, because there are technologies that decrease your mortality, which increases net growth. There are also technologies like birth control that reduce natality, though it comes with other benefits. Is there any kind of effect that simulates literate parents teaching their own children how to read and write? Even if a pop can't afford a formal education for their children, I would expect some level of homeschooling to be present, maybe some kind of cost reduction as an abstraction. Yes, the base wealth value, including increased consumption of services, etc., is meant to represent this as well. The ability to effectively homeschool your children is not available to those living and working in poverty. I remember being mentioned before that the new military tech just increases the original production quantity. Yeah, I hate that. I hate that a lot. For example, there are no rifles, just small arms, which is a bit disappointing. Agree. But I assume from this it means that I discover rifling, my factories produce more of the same small arms after I change the production, but then my military changes its production to rifles, which increases its combat power, at the cost of more small arms. Then when I discover bolt-action rifles, it's the same deal. I expend more small arms, my units consume more small arms, but the production unit type of bolt-action rifles and fight much better on the battlefield with the same quantity of manpower. Is this line of thinking correct? So, you discover bolt-action rifles. Your arms industries can now make more effective firearms, meaning your existing army becomes cheaper, or you export the excess and make your arms industries richer, or you upgrade your infantry or specialist corps, which might require other techs to use more firepower, making them more effective. it's like, did the ability to create... I suppose one way that one could look at it is, bullet's a fucking bullet, right? Bullet is a fucking bullet, right? If it hits you, it's gonna... You're getting pretty fucked up. One way you could... Oh, good lord, why did I do that? One way one could look at it is that bolt-action rifles are easier to make because the manufacturing process is more industrialized, more streamlined, whereas there was a lot more artisanship in earlier rifles, perhaps, and therefore, yeah, we've figured out a way of making new rifles. Not only are they much better, but also they're much easier to make because technology advances and so do the factories, and everything's great, right? That's one way to think of it. That, yeah, I now that I've got better rifles, I also make tons more because they're just easier to make. That's kind of the way I'm going to have to think of it, because otherwise I just hate the system. Yeah, I suppose it's like all that I'm able to... The only way I'm able to rationalize it, I guess. Would it be possible to mod the game to remove direct research and handle all tech spread through osmosis? Absolutely. Remove about 20 lines of script. Done. So yeah, how would that work? Then everyone would eventually have the exact same 30 texts and no one would research anything new. Is that desirable? It's probably a bad idea, I would assume. Can we queue research? This would help to avoid having to save up research points mechanic, would generally make life easier. So at present, no. It would actually be a pretty sizable feature, since it'd have to recursively compute which texts are prerequisites, since the trees can get quite complex, and manage and display the queue, alter the order of research queue automatically if certain texts become cheaper to research due to tech spread, different UI considerations since you can select any tech, not just the ones that light up as available, etc. It's also of lesser importance to have a save points mechanic, since excess innovation goes towards the text spreading to you, so you're not wasting your output if you don't immediately select the next tech. Alright, fair enough. So the eureka concept in the Civ 6 tech system is interesting, since it boosts research in a logical thing that the civilization excels at. Have you considered a similar mechanic, making, for example, research in steel production technologies more effective if you have a strong steel industry? That sounds a pretty cool idea, actually. We actually considered and discarded the eureka concept for Victoria 3 early on. It'd be trivial to do in our engine. What we didn't like about it is that it felt like putting the cart before the horse and constrained creativity. Rather than me inventing the Bessemer method because I need more steel, I build more steel mills so I get a discount on to researching the Bessemer method so I wouldn't be wasting my research. Presumably the increased focus on steel I get from this process now makes it cheaper for me to get some other steel production related tech, so it now feels bad to go research something in a different field where I don't qualify for a discount, etc. The connection between what a country knows and what a country does already comes naturally from the other direction. If I need more steel, I research a better way of making steel, then I implement that. My steel mills are now more effective, and more of my economy will start to rely on steel. Maybe my next invention will be in trade, so I can leverage the steel power globally, or in artillery production, so I can make use of the steel in my domestic armaments production. I prefer if players are free to think in those terms rather than what hoops they now have to jump through to get the best bonus next time. Main issue is with the AI, ensuring it doesn't make too harebrained decisions and research garbage that doesn't benefit them. It has nothing to do with their strategy. That issue should be dealt with in AI programming, not short-circuited via artificial reward systems, in said developer's humble opinion. So I quite like the idea that I have a strong steel industry, and maybe this should be... Because the concern from the dev there is correct, right? That you would build a strong steel industry just to get the discount, and then you'd have a discount on steel things, right? Cart before the horse thing is totally valid. However, at the same time, logical, thinking about what would be the reality is, if you have a lot of steel mills, one of them at some point is going to come up with a way of innovating such that they either make more steel or their process is cheaper or something. So in that way, researching better ways of making steel before you have a sizable steel industry is also putting the cart before the horse. Like this, there's just carts and horses all over the fucking place, let's be honest. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I suppose the way that they're doing it is more beneficial for the player, and the eureka concept is more logical to reality. And I think I do agree that going with what is logical for the player is better. Would it be possible to mod current literacy as a modifier? So current literacy is already a modifier in the sense that progression towards education access is gradual by definition. The higher the current literacy, the longer it takes to drop to a lower level, since it's modeled via birth and death rates. Meaning that also the higher the pop standard of living, the longer their life expectancy, and therefore the longer current rates stick around. Sure, we could make it adjust education access as well, but all that I do in practice is add more inertia and make the values that factor into it harder to understand. Fair enough. It will entirely depend on how fast it actually drops in practice, but if it goes from 100 literacy to 4% literacy in a generation, something somewhat insinuated, but could also just be generalized language in the image caption, that seems like too fast of a drop, even for the poor and propagandized. I don't feel like wealth fully captured the ability of the already educated to pass the knowledge on. Thanks for the answer. So, poor choice of words on the dev's part. The next generation of clerks, i.e. all pop growth from this point on, would indeed only have 4% literacy, but this pop growth happens gradually over time, so the length of time required to make that entire pop only 4% literacy would be equal to the time required to replace every individual member of that pop, so perhaps 30 to 40 years or so at least. About a third to half the total running time of the game. Longer than that if the high standard of living, even discarding the boost in education access, would inherently provide, and shorter if lower. So this is on about, see if I can find the image real quick. Is it that one? Nope. Is it that one? Nope. Is it that one? Yeah, okay. So it's this one here, right? That because these Dixie Protestants have been conquered by the Mexicans and therefore they are being discriminated against and they're struggling like hell, their previous high-ass literacy of 100% is going to go down to 4%. What this looks like is that it's going to take a pretty short amount of time, the next generation. But yeah, if that takes 30 to 40 years to take effect, then I don't think that's too much of an issue. That seems fine. So yeah, eventually only 4% will be literate unless their situation changes. But yeah, I think that's fine. I think this is actually fine. Now that there is that clarification, that works for me. So yeah, that is actually all of the developer comments in this dev diary. I would say the only things I have an issue with are not based on technology. They're based on literally the warfare system. But technology itself, I have no issue with. I think it's good. The things that I initially had like oh, hang on, that doesn't make much sense, I'm still kind of fine with. For example, this Eureka system that was mentioned. But yeah, I am pretty happy with technology, and I'm interested to get my hands on the system. I think that's just the case for everything. I'm interested to get my hands on the system so I can figure it out for myself. That's just given. That's just a given. But yeah, I think this is good. But I would like to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comment section below what you would have asked to the devs, maybe, if there was anything you had misunderstood, or would like clarification on, or anything like that. Let me know your thoughts on these replies, and like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more Victoria 3 content in the future, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.